the fantasy panel. We have Darin again, and we have Cody Goodfellow, an author, lots of different stuff, both fiction, worked on a number of movie shorts, and if I remember correctly, you're working for heavy metal right now. So not only was in the Clark Ashton Smith documentary, but also someone in the mythos and weird fiction circle for a long time. So thank you very much.
Also, what's your title with the film festival?
At the Lovecraft Film Festival,
Yeah, what's the character?
Co-director and spiritual advisor.
Yes, I am a spiritual advisor and psychopomp from a certain secret organization. I don't think I need to mention its name, but I host the Cthulhu Prayer Breakfast, and I help people dealing with their issues as they're walking along the backward path to the blinding blackness.
Right. So be sure to follow him. I'm sure he'll be a great.
I'm there for you.
Right.
I can testify that he does the best prayer breakfast ever in the history of the cosmos.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely making gravy without the lumps. But.
So to start off with, being the fantasy panel, what is either your favorite fantasy story or your favorite fantasy setting, and why?
Sure. I mean, my two favorite fantasy settings, and they're neck and neck, are Hyperborea and Zatik. I think they perfectly distill and bookend all of the aspirations and hopes and dreads of fantasy fiction, but underscoring them and all of Smith's work is human foibles. And so the wonder of those works is that they bookend, the dawn and the dusk of our species. And so, yeah, we don't learn. We don't get better, and yet we are in this world of unappreciated wonders. And but probably Zatik narrowly edges things out because I like grimness, and I love how the Seven Geniuses deconstructs the heroic badass alpha hero trope so beautifully. But probably my other favorite Smith story is The Voyage of King Uberan, because there's nothing more entertaining than a man chasing his hat.
Especially after the prayer breakfast tasks that you wear.
Right. I can appreciate a good noisy hat. So I understand what that means to a man.
So the two that come to mind, I guess, would be Hyperborean setting of the Tale of September Zeros, which is what I chose as my favorite one, and then the original art is down there. I'm the only one that's bought a page so far, so it's really good. But anyways, because it kind of has what Cody's talking about. Smith, sets these characters up. They might have a fatal flaw, and they get what's coming to them really good at the end. Unless there's somebody like September Zeros, who is just the most charming thief you've ever met. It's a story that you just smile the whole time you read it. It's so funny. It's I think it was one of Lovecraft's favorite stories by Smith. So yeah, big fan of that one. And that free comic book illustrates that book, that story. And then the other one is from Avalon, which is a setting that Cody didn't mention, which is kind of a medieval French setting where any sort of mythological creature might pop up at any time. And it's filled with sorcery, of course, because if we're talking about Smith's fantasy, pretty much it's not a fantasy story of his unless it has a wizard or a mage or sorcerer in it. But the story is A Night in Malneant. I think that's how you pronounce it. Really good story, really simple, beautiful, dark, and just a glorious story. So yeah, those are my two favorites.
Great. I should also say that this is a pronunciation-free zone. So
Don't judge me.
Geshes, Geeses, Melnion, Melniat. There actually is an article written by Ra Hoffman, one of Smith's friends, who goes through how Smith would have pronounced things. And if you can find it, I was hoping to reproduce it in the program, but we ran out of space. But
You accent the penultimate syllable.
right, the second to last syllable that's the key. I think it may be a French thing. I figure for the most part, if it pronounce it like if it was in French. So, no shade on whatever pronunciation you come up with. So Smith wrote, my own conscious ideal has been to delude the reader into accepting an impossibility or series of impossibilities by the means of a sort of verbal black magic, in the achievement of which I use the prose rhythm, simile, tone color, counterpoint, and other stylistic resources like a sort of incantation. Can you give some good examples of that?
Yeah. I wish Zethro was in this. I would read the first paragraph of that.
No, can you go?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the first paragraph of Zethro, I think, would be a good thing to read, but it's not in this one. Verbal black magic, let's see. Okay, well, I'll just give a little story. The first story I ever read by him was the end of the story. And I was just like smitten from the first paragraph. So let's see if that one qualifies as verbal black magic. Should I just read the first paragraph?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Have they all signed the waiver?
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, this is what ensorcelled me into the work of Clark Ashton Smith. Oh, it's actually two paragraphs. The first one's just real short. The end of the story. The following narrative was found among the papers of Christophe Morand, a young law student of Tours, after his unaccountable disappearance during a visit at his father's home near Malines in November 1789. A sinister brownish-purple autumn twilight, made premature by the imminence of a sudden thunderstorm, had filled the forest of Aveyron. The trees along my road were already blurred to ebon masses, and the road itself, pale and spectral before me in the thickening gloom, seemed to waver and quiver slightly, as with the tremor of some mysterious earthquake. I spurred my horse, who was woefully tired with the journey begun at dawn, and had fallen hours ago to a protesting and reluctant trot, and we galloped down the darkening road between enormous oaks that seemed to lean towards us with boughs like clutching fingers as we passed. So he kind of just, what he's talking about, I think, with that verbal black magic, he really just pours it on. And it's, it's wonderful. So I think, that works.
I'd like to hit you with a little clip from The Abominations of Yondo.
Oh, I was going to do that one. Go ahead.
Too bad.
Yep.
The sand of the desert of Yondo is not as the sand of other deserts, for Yondo lies nearest of all to the world's rim, and strange winds, blowing from a gulf no astronomer may hope to fathom, have sown its ruinous fields with the gray dust of corroding planets, the black ashes of extinguished suns. The dark, orb-like mountains which rise from its pitted and wrinkled plain are not all its own, for some are fallen asteroids, half buried in that abysmal sand. Things have crept in from nether space, whose incursion is forbid by the watchful gods of all proper and well-ordered lands, but there are no such gods in Yondo, where live the hoary genii of stars abolished and decrepit demons left homeless by the destruction of antiquated hells. That's doom metal. that is it uses meter and repeated vivid phrases that create a sense palette in your mind, and it is verbal black magic, and it is incantatory. It lulls you into a hypnagogic state wherein you're ready to accept and imagine anything. And his use of language is masterful, and reading him and looking at Lovecraft's stuff in the contemporary times, you could see how they were inspiring and kind of challenging each other. You can look at like the introduction to Dunwich Horror and can tell like he must have read Smith, and he's like, yeah, no, there's like an evocative way of making this mythic in the open introduction of the setting. The hills rise wild, right? And it sets you up, opens up your filter so that your ability to accept anything is at its widest dilation. And I think it is verbal black magic, and I think it is the kind of example of the judicious use of poetic techniques in telling a story to set the mind into an altered state and a dreamlike state. It puts you in a trance. And I listened to some really nice dramatic readings from Horror Battle of a bunch of Smith stories, all driving all the way up here from San Diego, and that's why I don't remember most of the trip. I was completely drawn into Smith's world and his imagination, and I was submerged into a hypnagogic state while operating a motor vehicle. And then we were not, right?
So Smith frequently used sorcerers and wizards, in particular necromancers, as both protagonists and antagonists. Why do you think that is, and what's a good example?
Oh, there's a lot of examples, yeah.
The dark Eidolon, you know, one of those two. Eidolon, thank you. Is a great example. What's the sorcerer's name? Ymira?
Ymira, right.
Ymira. That's a great example of a sorcerer, a dark wizard, but who is the hero, not as the protagonist, not the antagonist. Which he would do sometimes. He could kind of mix it up. Whether he was going to, whether the sorcerer, how did you put it? Like how the almost the morality of the sorcerer.
Well, what's different, because sorcerers were almost always the villains in everybody else's stories, especially in Howard. Like the sorcerer is the antithesis of the raw, clean, pure barbarian, because he's corrupted by knowledge and he needs to use this secret knowledge to work reality. Whereas Smith, I think, perhaps recognizing that the writer himself is by definition a necromancer or an oracle, identified with that as that's the highest aspiration. And so I love that Smith's stories, the people that were villains in a Howard story, are the heroes in Smith's stories. And like he wrote very few with succeeding characters, and like Doorway to Saturn, the sorcerer outwits everybody. And I think that he identified with that person as the person who can open doors and change reality and make illusion real, was what makes his story so delectable, because it's the sorcerer, it's not the barbarian who's going to lead us forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. Howard, the originator of sword and sorcery. I would say Smith is the originator of sorcery and sword.
Yeah.
So that's actually the Dark Eidolon is a good example, since the reason Ymir became a wizard is because the king trampled him over when he was a peasant, and so he spent all this time planning to get revenge. So death, loss, regret, revenge are very common themes in Smith's works. What are some examples of these, and why do you think this was, especially since some of these examples were written before he had the experience of his parents dying, Lovecraft dying, Howard dying? So what is it that he had such a focus on death, loss, and regret when he hadn't necessarily had anybody close to him die?
Yeah, I mean, I think he always had a grim turn of mind, but he did have a girlfriend die when he was young of tuberculosis, I believe, or I don't know if many people know much about her, but that's at least how the story goes. And it's ripe material for the style of writing that he was doing, I believe.
When you're a young writer, especially a young writer of dark genre fiction, it's de rigueur to romanticize death, and the difference between stories written by a young person that are very hard but are also at a remove from reality are very different from the stories you write in the sunset of your life when the realities are really, coming home and you get past that dish of angry candy, because first they come for your heroes, then they come for your family, then they come for your peers, and then if you're very lucky, last of all, they come for you. And Smith wrote in a flurry during this time, and he was very popular, and he was, I think, had 53 stories in Weird Tales, far and away the most published author. But when death really came through, when Lovecraft died and Howard died within like a year of each other, it dampened his light. He lost his passion for it entirely, because suddenly probably a lot of those stories that seemed so penetrating in their depiction of life and death and the struggles in between, suddenly probably felt kind of glib, kind of without any gravity. And it's tragic, because given the impetus and the momentum that he had going on, what would he have done if, but you can't love this stuff as much as we do without wondering what if these guys would have lived on, what would they have grown and become if they had the fullness of their lives. But Smith's silence after that, I think, speaks volumes. Very hard to enjoy volumes, but they're kind of it was kind of that ultimate truth that said, hush, child, you don't know what this is about yet. And I imagine that must have been very humbling and very, very disconcerting.
Yeah. Also, maybe his influence of Edgar Allan Poe.
Sure.
Yeah, certainly early on.
Yeah.
So do you have some examples of the stories that focus heavily on death and loss? First one I can think of is the Last Incantation.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, where his Malagris, the sorcerer, tries to summon his youth, love of youth, the love of his youth, but when she appears, she's not as he remembers, because he's had so much life experience, he's not experiencing her as he did in the full flesh of youth. Any other ones?
Actually, I think the City of the Singing Flame, to me, is about about the lure of the ultimate, or the lure of death, kind of in a pretty profound way.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that.
It's kind of implicit. In like all of even the later Hyperborea stories, there's always the encroaching frost that's coming. Even in the stories where Hyperborea is still a green and fertile land, there's always the prophecy of doom of the White Sibyl. It's even in the tale of Santa Ambrosius, what killed this city, and there's always so many of them take place in this God-forsaken, abandoned city with these lost people who their city is a monument to their hubris. But I think until you see like Malagris in The Last Incantation, it's not really poignant. There's a wonderful short film adaptation of The Last Incantation, done by Andrew Migliore, director emeritus of the Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, that manages to brilliantly capture the depth of regret of unfulfilled lives, and then seeking for that memory to try to go back and realizing that you can't, that it's your memories themselves are fantasies. is I'm just gonna hide behind you. That I think Last Incantation is probably the one that puts it in the most poignant light.
Mhm.
Yeah, I suppose any story with a necromancer, you know.
Yeah, well, it's definitely death that if it's a necromancer. I mean, yeah, it seems like most of Zothique, I mean, as you said, Zithra and Empire Necromancers, you know, just about anything.
Maybe every story. Yeah.
Just about every story.
Actually, I mean, the story I mentioned earlier, A Night in Malniant,
Mhm.
is kind of the ultimate story of loss. I mean, he enters this haunted city in this gloomy night, and he just wants to get a room, but every room that he tries to rent is full because they're preparing for his ex-lover's funeral. So it's actually really moving. But,
So Smith uses a number of distancing techniques to make his story seem weirder and stranger. What are some of these techniques, and what kind of examples would you give?
I mean, I think of how, it's impossible not to contrast it with Lovecraft, but Lovecraft's techniques are like 90% distancing techniques, you know, absence of dialogue, absence of any inner life in his characters. And so many of these stories like September Zeros or Dweller in the Gulf or Vaults of Yovambis, there comes a moment, I mean, especially in the science fiction stories, a lot of the dialogue is fairly quotidian. It doesn't have the poetic thing. It's hey, get your flashlights and your revolvers out and stuff. It's very utilitarian dialogue from these, you know, scientists or prospectors and stuff. But there always comes a moment where they're struck silent and mute and standing in awe and horror. And usually from the moment when that happens, the dialogue drops out. And quite often the characters have something, you know, things happen to them and they lose control. I know this is more of a science fiction story, so forgive me if I repeat myself in an hour. But I noticed there was a moment in the Vaults of Yovambis, which feels so much, reading it now, like a precursor to Alien. Like Dan O'Bannon must have read this and been kind of trying to bite some of that style. But there's like a moment near the climax of Vaults of Yovambis where one of the explorers is standing in a corner with his face to the wall with this thing engulfing his head. And it felt like that moment, that key moment in the Blair Witch Project, which has been so relentlessly copied when you're seeing this other person and they're facing away from you and they've somehow become the embodiment of everything that's wrong with the world. And things like that, and the withholding of the explanations that Lovecraft would gleefully lean into are, I think, distancing devices in the sense that these people, you're watching these people and you're aware and you're reading the account of what is happening to them, and yet they have gone apart from you. And they've gone into a place and experienced things that even these words cannot impart to you. And that, I think it was Bob Price who described the formulation of a weird tale using the context of like gospel, of ecclesiastical tracts. And there's always a revelation and a denial and a withholding of the final truth, and then acceptance of what you do know, but you're always coming away with the notion that there are higher truths that will completely elude you because they evade language, they evade rational thought. If you think them, you will not be able to think normal human thoughts or communicate those to people. And Smith always kind of reserved a space for that in his stories. That I think instead of giving you everything, there has to be a certain degree of withholding. As much as you show, there has to be that much more that is evoked in that darkness that you should be kind of relieved that you're not seeing the whole thing. Because often you see the whole thing, and you see the strings and the zipper and the suit and everything, and it kind of falls apart.
Did you have?
What was the
Distancing.
Um,
Distancing. Yeah.
I don't know if it's distancing, but one thing that always impresses me in his work is when there's a hard turn. Say like, what's a good example? What's the Zothic tale with the astrologer?
The last.
He shrinks.
hieroglyph?
He shrinks at the end.
Yeah, the last hieroglyph.
Yeah, last hieroglyph. So when when the astrologer starts shrinking, or say when in City of the Singing Flame when he goes through the portal, or in the Uncharted Isle when you basically the transition from one realm to another, I feel like he pulls off really well. Maybe that's a distancing effect,
Mhm.
but I just feel like he was really good at that technique of a little line here or there. And I don't know, you're a writer, so maybe you could explain how he does it, but something goes off balance for a second, and then all of a sudden the character's in a new dimension.
Right.
You know?
Which is often just a convenient device just to move the plot forward.
He's the best.
When in doubt, have somebody knock the hero unconscious and he wakes up in a new scene.
Yeah.
And somebody just explains, you don't get it, do you? Oh, convenient. I wish my education worked like that. I could just get knocked unconscious and But yeah, or something. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I love the Seven Geniuses so much, because the hero is this vainglorious jackass, and he's totally overripe for a pantsing, and he keeps receiving it, and from like almost the first act, he becomes just a golem, incapable of thought. Or except to just go, hey, what the hell's my body doing? I can't stop it. And so this character is an automaton moving to try to offer himself up to this series of gods and monsters who refuse him. And so this gradual diminishing as this character is devoid of any agency is kind of systematically stripping the whole notion of heroic fantasy down to its bones, and kind of mocking it as a sham. And I feel like that's totally a distancing device that eats very corrosively at the very notion of human agency.
Yeah, and you mentioned the end of the story. That is an example. It's a manuscript, so you're reading something that's a common Lovecraft distancing technique. It was set in 1789, and then it was in a dense forest isolating a small town. So, and then it's also been said that Smith's choice of unusual words and coming up with names, unique names, is another way to make you feel kind of uncomfortable, this is not normal, obviously. So, but to your point, Cody, about the seven cases, frequently Joseph Campbell's hero journey, the hero identifies a problem, ventures forth to find, and enters a magical location, and then overcomes the problem and overcomes an obstacle and brings the solution home. But in Smith's stories, he does the first couple steps, but then once he's in the magical location, he either fails, he is overcome by the obstacle. He overcomes the obstacle, but whatever he obtained is destroyed on the way home, or he just, like in the Holiness, I think it was Zedrach, he just decides to stay in this magical land because there's a beautiful lady there. So, why do you think it is that, I'm not sure, I don't know when Joseph Campbell's hero's journey was written, but I'm assuming it wasn't back when Rise Smith was writing, but why do you think he kind of takes that hero's journey and twists it to make it a dark ending instead of a more positive ending? And again, what would be examples other than the seven pieces that you might think of?
He had a somewhat low opinion of society, I think is why. I think he did.
Well, I think too, I think the way that he looked at things in his perspective on heroic fantasy, where the main character has this agency and a mission and perhaps, you know, a blood debt to repay, and he's going to triumph. And this is a fascinating thing in Pulp Fiction, because Pulp Fiction, some of it rewards that, but it also, Pulp Fiction is kind of gutter existentialism. If you look at authors like Cornell Woolrich and others, like Cornell Woolrich's stuff is bleaker than any cosmic horror, because usually these people are trapped by circumstances and their own uncontrollable urges. And I think what Pulp really brings forward in a way that even more formalized existentialism didn't really, is how everything that drives us that we like to think of as this is my heroic urge, this is my destiny. No, it's all pathology, it's all trauma, it's all instinct. You think you're doing something heroic, but you're driven to do that. It's not that I have decided to do that, or, you know, a water retard in the lake threw a sword at me. So I'm the one chosen by prophecy. You know, Pulp Fiction and cosmic horror is kind of the antithesis of that. It shows that what drives us is no more familiar or welcome than the things that are out there against us. And so many of Smith's, you know, archetypal fantasy stories have a character that's driven by these urges or by these flaws or one of the 7 deadly sins, and then they face this antagonist who's utterly inscrutable, utterly unknowable. All you really know about them is that they're smarter than you. The notion that Smith had these monsters constantly outsmarting humans to show that we're not that hard to figure out. We're not that special. It's not that makes us special. And he, I mean, even kind of nod at the notion that you know, love is the one thing, that the one pure motivational force. And yet, as a poet coming out of the post-romantic era, that was still, if anything can save us, if anything survives of us who is worth surviving, it's love. And yet, so often his characters are completely, you know, if they are in love, that's as much of a crazy quest or as much of a blind alley as anything else.
So to finish up, if someone had never read Smith before, unfortunate for them, what fantasy story would you recommend that they start with first, and why?
There's so many, you know, they have different flavors to them. You could recommend different ones to different people. All the ones I've mentioned so far, I think, would work. Oh, The Double Shadow might be good. That's a good one.
I'd say, I mean, like, I think the first one that I came across, and before I really understood Smith as the gray eminence that he was probably Return of the Sorcerer, because it's probably the most accessible and yet has these flavors that go beyond this simple story of you know, evil magician revenge.
Yeah, The Return of the Sorcerer is actually one of his modern stories, and so it's not set in Averone or Zathik or Hyperborea, so it's a little bit more
Set in
accessible.
Oakland.
Yes. And if you watch, sorry, Skinner.
Oregon fetid place.
And if you watch the Night Gallery adaptation of it, Bill Bixby, the Incredible Hulk, plays the assistant, and Vincent Price is the evil magician. So if you can track it down, it's something. The set itself is almost as much of the character as the rest of them. So, any questions at this point? Yes, go ahead.
I get the impression that there is a vast gulf among fantasy readers between people who are enchanted by Smith's prose, which I think would include everybody here, and people who just find him totally unreadable and can't stand him. And you either love him or hate him, there's nothing in between. Would you agree with that perception?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends on what you want to get out of fantasy. I mean, there's no end of the more like Harry Potter heroic fantasy end of it, where we're watching a character rise up and save us all, and stories that I think his language is kind of cited by some as it just doesn't work for them. I think his writing is infinitely more engaging and pulls you in more than Lovecraft, and his understanding of human nature makes his stuff a lot grippier and easier to work with. But I think it's kind of his caustic, if not pessimism, at least just mordant irony and sardonic nature that kind of beats people down. I like heroes who win. I like heroes I can root for, and quite often the protagonist in the story. I mean, like Dark Eidolon, it's seen from the king's perspective, but the king is definitely not the hero, and the guy who's getting the horrible revenge is really the hero. And as it just piles on and piles on, you're kind of forced to identify with the king. It's like, no, I don't want to. I want to identify with the guy who wins. And it's like, no, you don't always win. And I think that is what kind of turns people off when they are turned off by Smith's fantasies, is because some of us come to fantasy because they want to get a sense that we should win. And that's a laudable aspiration or hope for your entertainment. But Smith doesn't let us kid ourselves. And I think if we can afford that, and if we can accept that, and then figure out what is left for us, because existentialism crushes meaning, but it also liberates us. It forces us to recognize that meaning is the meaning that it's personal, and it's what you make in life. And so, the fool on the hill who has a song to sing every day is probably happier than the king that worries night and day about how he can get more taxes out of the fool. And so I think that is, I feel like that's a thing. And when I've talked to people who don't jive with Lovecraft or Smith, I found that's usually the marrow deep objection to it. And as far as whether the language itself is off-putting, I'm off-put by fantasy that doesn't feel like that where the language is very quotidian and mundane. He saddled his horse and rode out of town and stuff like that. And you want a sense of strangeness, because it shouldn't feel like these characters are made to act like they think and act as we do in our time, because then they're just playing dress up.
And that way, have you read Ursula Le Guin's From Elfland to Poughkeepsie?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
it. Makes that argument.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, David?
You were talking about how his stories speak to not always winning. What elements of his life do you think spoke to him the most in that regard? What do you think taught him that lesson?
He was bullied a lot, from what I've heard. Very sensitive, poor, worked as many different jobs as he could to try to support people. So
Yeah, also just trying to publish poems, was probably contributed to that. Getting a lot of rejection notices. Like in one letter from George Sterling, Sterling's like, you say this is the fifth, you've been rejected 15 times for this poem, and he's like, you want to stop at 4 rejections. So yeah.
I'd say that might be one.
Good question here.
Are there any writers today that evoke Smith?
Not on purpose.
Yeah, no, I think Cody does.
Thanks, man. I did edit an anthology of Hyperborea stories, which was kind of an exercise in self-torment, because I got a lot of submissions from people who were like, I never heard of this Smith guy, but I read a couple of stories. I like the cut of his jib. I think I got it figured out. Yeah, no. I was able to assemble a collection of stories, and I put one of my own in there because I had written one of those purely thinking there aren't enough of these, and there need to be more. And how hard can it be to do it? And I found it can be very hard. His stuff, it's not very easy to lift pieces out of Smith's stuff because it's all so beautifully woven together that you have to really get into the thing. And I wrote the most pure pastiche I've ever written, and it was satisfactory to me, and a few readers seemed to have liked it. But I was astonished to find that this did not become a bestseller, and it kind of sank almost immediately out of sight. And so yeah, this kind of thing is an anachronism. But if you can stay in touch with how it made you feel the first time you read it, how different it felt from everything else, what a departure, and almost a transformation. It plants a seed in your brain that kind of it outgrows and outcompetes a lot of other things. I think out of the people who were carrying on what Smith did, Jack Vance's Dying Earth books, fantastically evoke that, and even kind of one-up Smith just in the pure shittiness of his humans. and Michael Shea carried on that with his Niftaline books, which beautifully do that same kind of thing with the wily thief, and everybody is out for advantage. Right?
But anyone today, maybe ST knows somebody. Are there any writers today with it?
I was
Not
going to
really.
mention those, Ray Bradbury had a great admiration for Smith, but I am not sure that there's any story by Bradbury that actually imitates or even borrows from Smith. I can't think of any.
I think Bradbury was well aware that Smith was a conjurer, and that it could go the way of the Sorcerer's Apprentice if you try and put on his robes. Some of the better standout contributors to my anthology were Jesse Bullington, Brian Stableford wrote what many commonly consider the funniest and kind of most mordantly sardonic story in the collection, and got a really good one from John Shirley, and John Shirley is a true conjurer who can wear 7 pointy hats. Somehow he can shift gears and do a Western and then do a Smith style story that feels like it was found in an coral encrusted bottle at the bottom of the Aegean Sea.
Also, the other author who was going to be here, John R. Foltz, he has also been very heavily influenced by Smith, and he just recently had a novel out through Jackanape Press, one of our sponsors. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of it, but John R. Foltz, F-U-L-T-Z. I think you had a question?
Well, I was about to ask something about the Dying Earth, because obviously there's a lot of similarities. So is there a direct connection between the two, or are they both just reacting independently to what the astronomers and physicists are telling us?
I think Vance. I'm not sure if it was ever. Did he ever acknowledge formally? I know he acknowledged the influence by Smith. So he was clearly aware of them.
Again, I do discuss that very briefly. I think he was aware of Smith. It'd be hard to imagine that he wasn't, and specifically with the Zodiac cycle.
Right.
So I think it could be said, yes, he did read Smith.
Right.
But without writing anything like Simple Pastiche.
No, he definitely made it its own, but you feel like, wow, I found this home that I didn't think I'd ever feel again. And another author that I would bring up, there was a John Peelin anthology called The Last Continent in the late 90s of new Zotique stories, and it had some Stableford and even a Gene Wolfe. There's Gene Wolfe Zotique story, but Brian McNaughton is one who's very unjustly underrated and overlooked. And aside from just doing the hell out of the ghouls trope in a collection called Throne of Bones, he wrote a couple of Zotique stories that really capture and add kind of new teeth and claws to this notion of the earth winding down and we haven't learned a thing and the sun's about to set for the last time.
Do you find any influence from Smith on Harlan Ellison, again, he had a high admiration for Smith, but I don't know Ellison's work well enough to say.
Right, if he ever attempted anything that kind of riffed on that, I'm not aware of it, and I sure would love to know about it. Tell me, who knows? But I don't think so. I think a lot of those guys, as much as they respected him, they understood, I would just kind of, make a fool of myself trying to do what he did.
Yeah, I think that's what's so, unique about him is that he had a style that was kind of untouchable.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to have the art panel in about 10 minutes, so take a break and come on back. Thank you.